Broadcasting from occupied territories or the flea media, it's the Reality Dysfunction podcast. A space where a diverse group of brown folk from across the nation explore the political experiences and social future of our Chicano Latino community. Control the narrative. Resist the dysfunction.
Hey everyone, this is Dr. Ernesto back with another episode of the Reality Dysfunction. I have some very exciting guests with me today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Then we'll start with Scott Duncan.
Hi, I'm Scott Duncan. Scott Duncan Fernandez, also go by Scott Russell Duncan. I'm a writer and also senior editor at Somos in Escrito literary magazine and press. We've been working on putting together a Chicano science fiction anthology called Porvenir.
Hi, I'm Jenny Irizary, and I'm also an editor at the magazine and press, and I'm really happy to be here.
I'm Ernesto Hogan, a longtime Chicano science fiction writer. In fact, so long people call me the father of Chicano science fiction, author of High Aztech, Cortez on Jupiter, Smoking Your Blues, and lots of short fiction in other places.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rosa Martha Villareal. First of all, saludos to all mis paisanos in Texas, if you're going to be listening in. Some of you may know me from your college courses. Dr. Magdalena is one book that's used a lot. So I've been interested in the heritage, the dual heritage of Chicano writing, in that from our indigenous heritage, we get a lot of proto-science fiction in the legends and the way stories are told. And if you go to Spain, like I had, they're just crazy out there too. You go in these little villages, oh yes, down here, this lady comes down and she preaches about a virgin and this is that. So it's just our heritage from both ends. We already had the raw material for science fiction. So that is going to be my my direction today. So anyways, Rosa Martha Villareal.
Right. This is going to be exciting. I was saying to everybody that's on the panel before we started recording that I have been a lifelong science fiction person. I mean, as soon as I could start reading, I was reading science fiction. And so I'm super excited about talking with you all today. I think this is it. Like science fiction, you're just able to imagine a whole different world, a whole different way of thinking, different rules, different ideas, and then make those a reality. And it's, love science fiction. So what we're going to do first is let's talk about the book that's coming out. And Scott had mentioned it a little bit earlier, but let's go back to Scott and Jenny. And, let's talk a little bit about the genesis of the book, where the idea for it came from. And, what it is that you all at Somos and Escritos are hoping to accomplish.
Well, I think the idea came, it was pretty much the first thing Armando and I talked about. Armando Rendon, the head editor, when we first met. And he has a large collection of science fiction books. And, we talked about it. And the first thing we talked about was like Chicanos in science fiction. And, of course, we talked about Ernest, and we talked about Garcia, and we talked about some other books we had read and known. And so, and then recently there had been, at that time, it's been, about 5 years ago, what's it, Latinx Rising, and this come out? And we talked about, we really like it. But as we read, it's like we get, it caused me to think about our own representation and our own stories, right? I think at times we get kind of drowned out by these anthologies that are, they go for inclusivity, which I'm not against at all. But if there's anthologies are limited, they can only have 10 to 15, 20, whatever authors. And if two of them are Chicano or Mexican American, it's like we don't get really our voice out there. And so
well, wait a minute, Scott, just so that we're clear and the people who are listening are clear, when you say our voice, what you mean are Chicano, Chicanx writers.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. I have a very white name. Yeah, I'm Chicano. And so for me, it's like I have to be honest. Like when I read High Aztech when I was in grad school, and it's like you don't know, sometimes you need something till you see it, right? And that was a pretty freeing moment for me, where I saw like what's possible, what I always wanted, because I recall having read all these stories, and you push yourself down, because you're not you or someone like you is not the main character. and they look at you as the other, the foreigner, the weirdo, whatever, and or someone to be dominated, like through a lot of times metaphor, right? I always say the rubber suit. The only time you see Chicano on TV or Indian is in a rubber suit to be to be beaten or blasted. And it doesn't all boil down to that all the time, but it's like we want, and we have people here that can speak to this better than me. It's like Hogan said, being Chicano is a science fiction state of being, right? And I think for me, Armando and I and Jenny, we all talked about this anthology could be a place of imagination, and it's like where we could see ourselves, imagine ourselves to be. We're still a people informing in some ways, right? We can see what we can be, right? And so basically that's where it came, and we decided to we run this contest every year called the Extra Fiction Contest. So actually Ernest also judges that. And so we got to know a bit more, through the years, a bit more authors that write science fiction or write like speculative fiction, write fantasy, write, and it's also kind of, there's a lot of overlap because a lot of Chicano like literature or whatnot, whatever people are writing, it's all kind of like these are all kind of labels that kind of describe kind of the same things, right? And so we kind of approached some people and they all said yes. And so we decided to put this book out called El Porvenir.
Right. And for those of who are listening who are linguistically challenged, how would you translate the title? Anyone?
Oh, the future now.
The future now. Okay. Yep. Yeah. All right. That's a great title. Jenny, I know you want to weigh in on this.
Well, so Scott and I have had a series of friendly discussions and even arguments since we've been talking about the anthology, because I was really stubbornly, in my mind, not a science fiction or speculative fiction fan. But then I started to think about all these writers whose writing I did like, and the satire, sort of dystopian satire I did like, the offering up of possibilities for the future that were maybe very scary or maybe very full of like things getting better and other options. And I realized, oh, I do like sci-fi. It's just that in my mind, it had to have a spaceship or something. Or I'd been told by so many people throughout my life that I couldn't like sci-fi because I didn't like exactly which fandom they were a part of or something. So I'm really excited because reading the Extra Fiction Contest entries, reading the pieces in this anthology, I thought, oh, I've just been in denial. And this whole time, these are the kind of themes I've often gravitated towards when I've looked for books to read. But I just got caught up in like sci-fi, oftentimes thinking of it as something that was like outside the realm of near future possibility, instead of thinking, oh no, oftentimes it's very much in the moment, like maybe imagining the future or imagining the past or imagining time travel, but through the lens of a lot of things that are relevant issues for whoever's writing it.
That's the one thing that I've always, once I got to a certain age anyways, and thinking about what I was reading other than just, like reading it for entertainment, it always struck me, how science fiction, even though it's supposed to be about the future, all this, but it's really, so much like all literature, critique of the moment, that we live in. And I think that's really important. But that brings me to my question. One of my questions for the authors is why is it so important for Chicanos, right, as descendants of indigenous people who you could arguably say already live in a dystopian reality, right? How important is it for us to participate in this genre, to write science fiction? Either Rosa Martha or Ernest.
Well, I can go. Also, I'd like to basically say that my mother's maiden name is Garcia. I was born in East L.A. My first years were spent on Barney Beach Place right next to Whittier Boulevard. So just in case anybody was wondering, you can't see me. But basically, I always saw even back in the 50s and when I was a kid in East L.A. Science fiction was part of the landscape. It came in through television. There was Space Patrol, Commando, Cody. I remember one of my great things of my childhood was seeing Forbidden Planet in an East LA drive-in. So that was always thing. But as you're saying, we do live this strange reality where we're not quite perfectly meshed in with the dominant culture. So we kind of almost live like aliens. I remember as a kid, I used to have these. Go to school, I would get through by fantasizing that I was basically this alien somehow dropped into this school, and that's how I was dealing with all these people from this place called back east, and all that, and that was sort of a part of my strategy for survival. And as I got older, it seemed like we were living in a science fiction world. Like about 1969, I was starting to go into high school. We landed on the moon for the first time. It seemed like, oh wow, a lot of this stuff's becoming real. And I found out that a science fiction magazine was actually being published around the corner from where I lived in West Covina at the time. And through the Crawfords who published Spaceway magazine and did Fantasy Publishing Company Incorporated, and later ran science fiction conventions, I got to really meet a lot of people in science fiction, and so it seemed like very natural for me to want to get into this. And also, I've always had more imagination than my own damn good. So it was just it was a great place where I could take advantage of it. That basically it seemed, but basically they say we are. God, I hate the term minority, but and I keep hearing that lately, the underrepresented minorities, but I guess that's what we are. All you have is the future sometimes, though we do have a rich past in history. I was Porvenir, I was impressed by all the time travel stories, and I realized, damn, history is what we're all about. It's this history that people have forgotten and we're bringing back and all that. So, but we say we basically have this kind of unique, very strange take on things that for me just seems to be very natural for science fiction. And also I always felt that the future starts now, and I was always been more interested in what's happening in the next couple of decades than the far future stuff is fun for fooling around and all that, but to me the real heart is how are we going to get from here to there, and especially when there's all these issues going on right now that we really need to address.
When I was working on my dissertation, one of the ideas that I came across was something that Ward Churchill had written when he was talking about being an indigenous, and he made reference to this idea of future history and talking about, how the history of indigenous people is really the future, of the world that we live in. And I have to say, I had to take a couple of days off and think about that. Now, there might be some people who are listening who are like, whatever, but I mean, really, the more I thought about it, the more I was just like, what a powerful way to really think about what it is that we're doing and the world that we could be creating, to think about it as future history. And that is indigenous history, is future history. But Rosa Martha, you were talking about when you were in Spain, and I was just wondering if maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit more in terms of the question, and thinking about all of the different pieces that are funneling down into these moments that we're living in right now.
Well, if we look at Spanish history, for example, we tend to think of things like Spain is Europe, but Spain has always been separate from Europe in that it has these imaginary boundaries. That in during the Second World War, Spain had different sized railroad tracks to keep out other people from coming in. They were very guarded about their history, and their belief systems, which is very rooted in mysticism, and especially Catholic mysticism. But it's also a confluence of three great cultures: the Catholic culture, the Muslim culture, and the Jewish culture. And the Jewish and Muslim cultures also bring their mysticism and ways of storytelling. And so from that stew right here, they brought that to the Americas. And then it almost like the Indians, the Indian indigenous cultures were like the twin. This is why Carlos Fuentes, my favorite writer, calls it like a buried mirror. Somewhere in the world, there was a buried mirror, and these two cultures who never met each other had a similar sensibility in how they perceived reality. Now, if we look at reality, as Levi Strauss said, as being a construct, It's how our minds construct what we see. If you come from a deconstructed culture, which I think we are, in that we have different perceptions, cultural perceptions of the world, then we can perceive that there is more than just what we are saying is real. In other words, real is bigger. Real is, time is not just linear, it's not just circular, but it's simultaneous. That I have this line in Doctor Magdalena that said, in Mexico City, the navel of the moon, because a piece of the moon shot off from space when the universe was being created and made the Valley of Mexico. That there, time piles again on top of time. Time never moves. It just stacks up on each other. And therefore, past and present happen simultaneously. Someone else may say, oh, that's not real, but it is. It's just how you construct your reality. And I think the science fiction writer, what he or she does is that given we have the passport of fiction to be able to deconstruct the present into a larger place where past, present, future coexist.
I had actually read something that says that remarking on Chicano science fiction, saying it's attempts to disrupt imposed European time to return to like a more like indigenous time, which I guess is many societies have different like counts of the time, whatnot. But the other thing I wanted to mention when it comes to apocalyptic like how Native people have been in this apocalypse, when we had the section of Porvenir where we put these kind of post-apocalyptic stories and whatnot, we labeled it Apocalyptic Aztlan, and then in our little description of it, we say this is the nonfiction of Chicano science fiction.
Actually, I think what Rosa said about deconstructed culture, which is actually I think what we are, and we're and one that when you're in that sort of, you can't help but you got to kind of reconstruct your culture in order to try to find yourself, or figure out who you are, but and in doing that you're coming up with something that isn't the past, and also is not agreeing with the dominant culture. Often just by accident, you're creating something that's very much like science fiction, even though you may not be trying to do that. When I write about try to do like the nonfiction, people tell me, "Oh, this is very imaginative." It just seems to be the way I see things.
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, it's the very first thing that when you were saying that, when you were both speaking, I mean, what really jumps to mind, sort of like enamored with this idea of this return to history, right? That comes through in the writings of Amilcar Cabral, and he's talking about overthrowing how colonized people overthrow colonialism, right? Is that they have to return to history, and he's not saying that they go back and live like they did 500 years ago, but that they like you were just saying, Ernest, that they have to think up this new thing that's somehow connected to the past, but is also provides sort of like the juice, so to say, like the political and cultural juice that allows them to move past the moment that they're in, right? Because I mean, if you think about even the history that we're living, I mean, you could make an argument that we're not even really living our history right now, right? That we're actually living the history of the settler. And so to think, and I think it takes us back to like what Churchill was saying and talking about indigenous history is future history. And what's that guy's name? Nick Estes also sort of revisits that idea in his book. I can't remember which one it was about. It was about the stuff that happened up in North Dakota. And to think about the role that I think science fiction can play in terms of that, and in really helping people to see how it could be different. The world, it could be different. I think that if we can see something and we can explain it, then it can be true. How do we do that? How do we explain the near future? Do we explain it as a continuing, indigenous apocalypse, or do we explain it as, oh, look at this is what we can do to change things? And I think it's interesting, if I understood what you were just saying a second ago, I think it's really interesting that the more realistic stuff that you're doing, that people are like, oh, that's really imaginative. I mean, I think that when people think about like indigenous liberation, I think that's about as science fiction-y as it gets for a lot of people. They're just like, well, what do you mean? Because of what it entails.
Oh yeah, well, reading up about that, about basically our culture and all this sort of stuff there, it's like an incredible thing for science fiction ideas. People ask me, where do you get your ideas? Well, I'm plugged into this very rich, volatile culture that's also creating new things, new identities, new ways of life. I mean, every couple of decades, there's sort of in different parts of the world, we're seeing these new things that are all kind of connected to the whole Chicano thing. And I'm just so it's just very inspirational, and I'm glad to see more writers are starting to do that. More Chicano writers are suddenly appearing and doing this, because I think it's just going to create better fiction for everybody.
I think the work of both these writers does this reconnection. I mean, like in Rosa Martha's Doctor Magdalena, the main character. I mean, I'm not going to spoil anything, but like she
it's been around for a long time.
Yeah, it's been around, but yeah. So she goes through a kind of magical market, and she reconnects with some goddesses, right? And then like time goes skips around and goes a little bit crazy, but it's a reconnection, the reforming. It's a different manner of healing. For me, that's absolutely does that, and like reforms and reconnects. And like in Ernest Hogan's High Aztec, absolutely, he describes a world of where like a Mexica resurgence, where people speak Nahuatl, is the future. People, and then there is a virus that's experimental virus that kind of takes different religions, and the main character gets infected and then affected again. And so like he takes all these heritages and aspects, and there's a reforming of worldviews, essentially.
Jenny, did you want to jump in?
I think one of the reasons that we all had a sense of urgency about the book is that the various climate disasters that are happening are making it very apparent that there has to be an adaptation of science that's been around for a long time. So in California, finally, there's a little bit of a recognition of fire ecology and how it can help the plants, and how it can actually like allow humans to continue to survive. And there's a lot of discussion around dams that were constructed and how those are going to have to change. And the whole relationship to water will have to change if salmon will be able to continue to be alive, if all of these different plants and animals are going to be able to continue to be alive, and that we have to completely change the settler-imposed relationship to our entire environment and all the living creatures around us.
I recently took a road trip from Prescott to San Jose, California. And once we hit California, the whole way, it was like billboard after billboard after billboard after yard sign. What about the dams? And what are you doing with the water? And I mean, it was intense, man. I was like, this is a thing that's happening here. So I was wondering if maybe you guys could talk a little bit about the stories that you're writing for this particular anthology, maybe some of the other stories, and then if Ernest and Rosa Martha are willing, just to sort of give us an overview of what it is that they're doing for this book.
Ernest, do you want to go first? Or?
Okay. Well, I can say I actually, since judging the extra fiction contest, I kind of noticed that a lot of these stories were stories that I originally read as judging the contest. They were finalists in there, and so basically the contest is generating things that, and I was always glad. I always feel bad about a writing contest because there's all these good stories that get recognized but not published. So this just made me feel really good, and also basically, as he said, there's a Mario Esposito, Fred Lechuga, and of course Rudy Garcia, who I've known for cohorts of mine. I was basically impressed with the wide range of their stuff from near future things to space opera. And once I mentioned before, lots of time travel. We seem to be all about history and also rediscovering history. I keep making that we have these arguments that about our history that can only be solved if somebody invents a time machine. We're doing that. So I was very impressed by all that, but also just overall, it showed the sort of the Chicano imagination and what it could do. And basically, as for my story, it was kind of inspired by my recent ventures. I took a road trip outside of Aztlan into Northern California and Wyoming and various other, that whole area. I'm beginning to call Sasquatchlandia because you see Sasquatch seems to be the national animal of that part of the world. You whether or not they exist and all that, you see them painted every. I ate at Sasquatch Donuts and all these places have it almost as their mascot. And so I was, but also I was noticing that I would see Mexican food places everywhere, and so it seemed to be that you can even in up in like Washington, you can go to a Mexican restaurant that is dressed almost like a Disneyland version of Mexico inside it, but also you go by the kitchen and okay, yep, people are speaking Spanish in there. They're so these people are recent arrivals, and so this Aztlan is kind of expanding into Sasquatchlandia. So that's kind of what my story is about, and it's sort of like what I saw, sort of the latest thing I saw happening. And so, did you have anything else there, Martha?
Yeah, I do. I'd like to talk a little bit about the genesis for my story, which is called the Navel of the Aztec Moon. Mm-hmm. And I'm going back to that concept of the this part of the moon hitting the earth, and that's the Valley of Mexico. And again, I've always wondered, how did the Nahua wise men know this? Unless consciousness can transcend time-space. Mm-hmm. And I think this is what we had there. So I took that idea, and I'm also a big believer in the genealogy of literature. And I have my Carlos Fuentes right here, one of my favorite books, or Auda. And yeah, and my story, the Navel of the Aztec Moon, is actually a continuation of the story. And if you're familiar with the story, it is a story about a historian who represents the male patriarchal worldview, who goes into this house of this woman, Aura, or Señora Consuelo, who is also Aura. And she is both herself as a young person, as an old person. And that's his journey of discovery. By discovering that, he also discovers himself. But this is the way Fuentes ends his story, because of the love story between Felipe and Señora Consuelo. He says, you plunge your face, your eyes open into Consuelo's silver white hair, and you'll embrace her again when the clouds cover the moon, and when you're both hidden again, when the memory of youth re-embodied, rules the darkness. She'll come back, Felipe. We'll bring her back together. Let me recover my strength, and we'll bring her back. And the initial title for the story was She'll Come Back. Mm-hmm. And so I take the same, this is the third version. My story is the third version of the story. The first one was Henry James's, is it the Aspirin Papers? Yes, the Aspirin Papers. And then Carlos Fuentes rewrote it in what they call magical realism. And when I read this, I said, that's not magical realism, it's science fiction. Because we're talking about transcending time-space, about Consuelo being the old woman and the young woman simultaneously. And this place, the house where it's all in darkness, and darkness symbolizing the eternity, of the other self that we have. There's light and there's dark, there's the moon, there's the sun. And Felipe immersing himself in that world. And so what I said, okay, well, I'm going to do the science fiction version of it. So you have the three people, but instead of an old woman, a young woman, and a young man, we have the old man, the young man, and the young woman in there. And the story is told or retold from the perspective of a science fiction. The young woman is a physicist. And so when they put the ad out for the person, they wanted someone, the historian wanted someone to explain how it was that his wife came back, or could get his wife back again, through what is the science of this thing, this phenomenon. And so that's where I got the idea that somehow there is a portal that opened in Mexico City, in the Valley of Mexico, where all of these things happen. And it has spread around the world. And now the characters are trying to explain all that. So that's the concept of my story here. And I won't say the story because Scott and then Armando will kill me. They hate it when I get it.
That's an awesome story. That's great.
Also, I've kind of found that in a sufficiently technologically advanced society, magic realism tends to become indistinguishable from science fiction. Because like if we were trying to write a magic realism story about a Zoom meeting, it would you couldn't help but make it sound like science fiction, you know.
Exactly. I mean, there really magical realism was kind of a condescending term for the fiction that was written from our sensibility, from our cultural heritage, where we have our constructs are wider. They're not as condensed as those of Western Europe. And it really is, you know, if you know a little bit about quantum mechanics and quantum physics and the time-space fabric and continuum, you know that what we've been writing all along since pre-Columbian times has been what we call today science fiction. It's just a continuation of the same tradition, but clothed in the words of the technological language of science.
Never thought about it like that. I just had a serious moment. I'm not even kidding. No, that's seriously, you just blew me away with that. I mean, because you're right. That's exactly what it is. That's crazy. Oh, it's going to change a lot of things in some of my classes. It really is. It's going to change some things about the way that I talk about some of the books that we read. That's incredible. I think, but you know what? Oh my God, that's really smart.
Is that a compliment?
Yeah, that's a compliment. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ernesto.
Yeah. Oh, somebody else talk. I don't even know what to say. I'm still thinking
I want to say that the whole progression of magic realism, I mean, I'm in agreement 100% with Ernest and Rosa Martha. It's just the whole progression, how it used to be something, it used to be like I would say in the 90s, it used to be something that foreign only, like in literature, like, oh, it's only Gabriel Garcia Marquez or someone from South America, you know, like it started in Mexico, of course, could do. And then like, no, like domestic Mexicans can't do anything, you know, or whatever, until like, only you guys are capable of this. And as if it's patting our heads on it. And now everyone does it and taking away all the labeling they had did. It has to be political. It has to have a sense of carnivalesque. It has to all other stuff, but that's all out the window. And they call it magic realism. I think it's kind of like, and now it's like not something that they say necessarily it belongs to us because they decided that they want to do it, essentially, you know.
If I may interject in here, when I was teaching intro to literature at Cosumnes River College, I was using a book. It's called it's about Latin American women writers. And all of these stories, in fact, there's a bunch of stories. Let me get away from that, what I was just saying. There are a group of stories that all take place in the navel of the moon in Mexico City, where, and one of them is, gosh darn it, I'm trying to, one of them is Aura. The other one is a story by Amparo Dávila, where a man sees himself. It's himself, not a double, it's himself, living simultaneously in the same reality, knowing the same people. And she doesn't explain how this is, it just is. And then there's another story, is it by Elena Garro? Yes, it's by Elena Garro, where this woman crosses the bridge and she goes back to her who she was in the time of the conquest, which she was the wife of an Aztec warrior. And she goes back and forth, and people say, "Oh, we saw Laura with that horrible Indian, goodness, the Indian, and this and that," and it was her husband, and it is just this bridge over that water represents not just H2O, but the rivers of time. And if she goes over the river of time, she goes back and forth. And so there's something there that we're not quite getting yet. Our science hasn't caught up. See, this is the thing about what they call magical realism. The science is catching up to what our imaginations have already revealed to be true. And it is our heritage right here in the way we perceive things that allows us to, it is like at Porvenir, it is the future. We have been telling the stories in this, what they call futuristic way, but all it is just telling it how it is. And now the science is starting to explain what it is, but it's always been there. And it's, you know, I think this is why this book is important, because it will add to the corpus of our work, to the genealogy of literature, where we can reintroduce people to this other way of seeing things. Because there is not just, now I'm getting into postmodern theory here. I'm going to stop right here because it's go on for a while, and you know, not everyone's interested in that. But anyways, our stories are important because, for the lack of a better word, they are universal. This is the human experience. We are the visionaries. We are the seers, the writer, the creative, the painter. We see and we feel what everyone has within them, but we have the way to express it for them, and we're expressing that the reality is much bigger than what we perceive. What we've been told is the real reality.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
That's yeah. Hell yeah. That's what's up. I mean, yes, I agree. I even feel like saying I agree is not adequate enough. Yes.
I can add in a weak follow-up that I've had a billion arguments, because I don't actually really believe in nonfiction, or like as in nonfiction stories. And which brings me to a head with a lot of my friends that write only memoir, right? Because I tell them, like, so you're not writing about every meal you had, you're not writing about every thought you had, or about like the time you tripped a little bit. So it's a recreation, which is an artifice, which is fiction, right? So it's like you're really putting out your point of view at this certain time of that certain time. And so it's all point of view and all what we think. It's all like a recreated worldview. And so, I mean, let's go along with what Rosa Martha is saying.
And sister, anytime you want to talk about postmodernism, you can come to the Reality Dysfunction. That's what we do here. Right. We swim in the ocean of postmodernism. We're all like, "Are you sure?" That's
your new tagline.
Yeah, well, we swim in the ocean of postmodernism. Yeah, that won't turn anybody off. Wow. Okay, so we're also trying a new thing here, and we're trying to keep our episodes to about 30 minutes because we noticed that people listen to them more, or they listen to them all the way through. And so we're pretty much at 30 minutes right now, but you all are geniuses. I mean, seriously, this has been a great conversation. It's been one of the best conversations I've had in a long time. But who would like the last word? You want to talk about the book? You want to tell us when it's coming out? You know, anything. I mean, give us the skinny.
Maybe me and I don't know. I don't want exactly the last word, but I mean, I just want to mention, like, these are some of my favorite writers right here. It's always an honor and always, you know, mind expanding to speak with them and read their work. And I think, you know, it goes to other writers in El Porvenir. Yeah, it's coming out this January. It's coming out this month. Any time between now, the 9th, to the end of the month, 31st. So it's keep your eye out for it. It's kind of hard to predict sometimes. We got to argue a few things out. Jenny, would you like to add anything?
I totally second what Scott said. And the authors, not only the authors here, but all of the authors in this anthology are, some of the best sci-fi writers out there. So, there's time travel stories about reconsidering events and trying to provide healing for family members, trying to deal with trauma. There are multiple timelines interacting in terms of a lateral bus line, but it's intersecting with different points in time and different events. And also a veteran dealing with PTSD and that timeline that's sort of always going on for him and may not be going on in the same way for people around him. There's stories about reconsidering the point of view from which history is told, and even whose accounts and narratives a PhD history student is considering. And she encounters people that may be the same people, but at different points in time, but all of those points in time are happening simultaneously. And there's much, much more. Those are just a few of the stories that are, that are in there.
So where will people be able to buy this book at? How do you purchase this tome? Or where do you purchase it?
You'll be able to look at on our website, somos.com. You could also go Amazon to Barnes and Noble.
Barnes and Noble, okay.
And what's the other one? Bookshop. And then some you can ask for it at your local bookstore, and they'll pick it up, and you can get it from there as well.
Okay. Hey, Scott and Jenny, it's good to see you two again. Ernest and Rosa Martha, this is our first time meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, cool.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your book, by the way.
Good to meet you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I'm honored to be a part of this conversation. I mean, this was good. I look forward to any future collaborations. All right.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
This is the Reality Dysfunction.